Good morning.
Good morning.
I've decided to have me some coffee with you, darling. I know it's an early morning for you.
Thank you. Oh, man.
We're just going to give it a few more minutes. When people get in, get settled in. So if you need to get you a water or anything, feel free.
I got my flask.
Girl, that's like, I got me a whole little setup right here. If you see it, oh my gosh. I've been writing. I was like, oh my God, please let me slaughter any of this.
No, you're good. You're good.
Please be patient with me. So I will try not to slaughter anything.
Oh, no worries. Don't worry. It's all love.
So she is on the other side of the world. It is, what, 6 a.m. there?
Yes. Bright and early.
It is. It is Wednesday, so she is kind of back to the future with us for first. And so it's in Central Time here. So we're going to go ahead and do a little introduction here for IP3. Welcome, everyone. I am Chanell. I'm your host for Skoden Talks, homies, brought to you by Indigenous Peoples Project, aka IP3. IP3 is an organization that provides nonviolent direction action training, campaign strategy, and community organizing tools to support Indigenous communities taking action in defense of their homelands. IP3 is currently taking community training requests and will be offering our annual action training for Indigenous organizers and activists later this year. For more information, contact info@ip3action.org. That is info@ip3action.org. All right. So our guest today for Skoden Talks is all the way from Guam. Like I said, it is 6 a.m. I am so glad to have you. Good morning, good morning, good morning. I would like for you to go ahead and introduce yourself so I don't slaughter your name and we can get it correct.
Yeah, no worries. So I'm Siobhon Rumarang McManus. I'm a Palauan-Chamorro living in Guam. And yeah, I'm so happy to be here this morning. I'm really thankful to have this opportunity to talk. And yeah, thanks.
She is also an author, activist, and educator from Guam.
Yeah. So Guam is the name of our islands in our language. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And she is also working to decolonize the classroom and empower Nations through Indigenous art and education. So, would you like to give us a little bit of your background with the works that you've been doing?
Yeah, so just a little context. I like grew up, I'm like the daughter of educators, and so I've always kind of been around the classroom, and specifically growing up, like the school that I went to was in the southern part of the island, and it was kind of like growing up knowing that we were in sort of like the rougher area of our island slash neighborhood. Um, and so I think I've always had like an awareness of um, that the classroom could be a place where students were supposed to have access to things that they didn't have access at home. And I think I've always just grown up really like conscious of that. I'd say that I didn't actually start doing the work of education slash activism since maybe around 2016. So when I had come back home, we had this festival of the Pacific arts and culture, and it was kind of this like big summit of all of the islands in Micronesia, Melanesia, and Polynesia. They all kind of gathered in Guam. And at that point, I graduated college and I'd been looking to teach back home. I had wanted to move home and kind of get into the work that was happening here. And a lot of things had happened at once. There was a lot of great movement. There have been a lot of great movement leaders doing work since that time. And I had started to at that time, I mean, the military buildup has kind of impacted us ever since 2008. But at that time, a lot of communities were organizing and gearing up for the next wave of military buildup uh, activities. And so, two groups specifically that I started doing work with in 2016 was Independent Guahan, which is a movement for political decolonization and education of that. And then Prutehi Litekyan, which is specifically a group that was organizing to stop the firing range being built in these sacred ancestral lands in the northern part of our island that also uh, just holds a lot of other significance environmentally, culturally. It's over our water. So yeah, I started volunteering for those groups, doing educational outreach, community outreach, going to protests, learning more about kind of the history of their work. And that was in 2016, 2017. And ever since then, I've either been organizing with them or doing education with other groups. Yeah.
Awesome. So,
Mhm.
who has been like an inspiration to push you into this, or was it just something that caught your interest and what I've got to be
Mhm. Yeah. And you know, my parents have always been very their activism to me has always been very rooted in just their love for like the community and like the village. And I think I wouldn't have been so inclined to organize and be part of larger like direct action groups if I didn't have that foundation of like parents who showed me what it's like to really build your life around loving and educating and serving your community. And so growing up and having that model of like uh, that like the word obligation in our language, to be obligated to each other is not like a bad thing, and that having to know your role within the community and knowing that at our most base level it's really important that we, you know, serve our elders, serve our babies, that we go out of our way to build our lives, like, and fill it with these obligations to each other. And that protecting and serving one another isn't, I mean, obviously with like practice of boundaries and stuff in place, but overall it isn't a burden, but it's like a privilege and an honor. To me, I feel like that really laid the foundation to do larger, more strategic organizing and activism, because I feel like it was coming, I felt like I had a good foundation to go in there and not get burnt out, because it was like, okay, if I could come from a place of like all the work that I'm doing is from this fundamental point of like love for my people, then I won't get like too tired in like the fight itself, or the kind of like heaviness and intensity of looking our histories in the face every single day and having to organize around that. Because I think decolonization work in and of itself is really like intense and can be very mentally and emotionally and spiritually taxing. But watching my parents kind of live their whole lives and doing community service and basic, like, especially since the work that they did was always very mutual aid, like the most basic form of helping your community, where it's like you help poor people get access to basic needs. I think having a foundation of loving my people first before having to fight for these bigger issues, definitely they've been my role model ever since I was little. So yeah.
That is awesome.
Mhm.
Choking currently, so excuse me.
Oh, no worries, no worries.
Oh my gosh. I was like, I'm not trying to cut her off.
Oh, you're good, you're good.
I read you're a writer and author, so do you have anything currently that you are working on?
Man, yeah, I have a couple of essays that I'm working on, some poetry that I'm getting ready to submit for this AAPI collection. Um, but yeah, I think the most current thing I'm working on is actually essays about just like our cultural approaches to grief and memory, and how it's very like normalized in our culture, like death in general, but the ways that kind of we approach that in the modern age, where like colonization is constantly kind of interrupting the ways we as a community are allowed to grieve. Specifically, just thinking about uh, how the military buildup specifically has disrupted so many burial sites, and kind of just like what it means for us as a community to have our own collective practices of grief interrupted by kind of like these really big industries that are currently in Guam. Not even just like the military, but like tourism, all of these massive industries that are kind of interrupting our practices. So, yeah, it's kind of like a lot of different things, but that's currently one thing.
And that's to me, that's a worldly thing. I mean, I see that here in the States. I see that even in my own tribe. I mean, we're slowly evolving into what is modern colonized thinking and way of doing things. Like there's no old way. And it's like I
Mhm,
never wanted to be that person to be like, oh, we used to do it this way, or back in my day,
mhm,
like I'm only
mhm.
35. I
Yeah.
totally I feel that because it's like we are changing
Mhm,
because of colonization.
mhm,
I never really
mhm,
got that till here recently. So yeah.
mhm.
So I would definitely love to read what you got going on because it
Thank you.
affects the whole world. And I mean
Mhm,
everybody needs to hear and see what that looks like.
mhm.
So is there any authors or is there anything that you have out that we can find of yours?
Man, I so my work, the the most recent work that was published was part of this collection called Kinalamten Gi Pasifiku, or Insights from Oceania, and it was a collection of poems and kind of short prose stories that was published here in Guam, and so that's where like my poetry and a short story is. Naturally, all of my first writings that were published were about my grandma, as I feel like a lot of Indigenous people end up writing about their grandmas, which I think was like is so funny and special and like cliche in the best way. But yeah, those are where like my published works are right now. I have like a blog where I sometimes put essays, but I'm not really pushing that right now because I'm like I think I need to like edit some of these. But yeah, the book is called Kinalamten Gi Pasifiku, Insights from Oceania, and it was published by a publishing house here. But yeah.
Awesome. Can
Mhm.
you tell us a little bit what the Ni organization is?
Yeah. So Nihi is a Chamorro-based, Guahan-based cultural media, indigenous media group led by our director, Kara Flores. She's been doing, I mean, it has activist roots because she's been doing work ever since this group called We Are Guahan back in 2008 when the buildup first started happening. But now the group is really meant to be a place where we create Chamorro media, Micronesian media, with kids and elders from our island. And so recently I've been doing a lot of their, I'm working for them now full time, doing communications and kind of their helping with scripting and editing a lot of like the media that we push out. And right, so they've done a bunch of different programs in the past, whether it's like Chamorro language programs or education around like specific topics that are relevant to kind of our island and region. But yeah, I've been with them on and off, but now I'm full time. But ever since like maybe 2019. But yeah, they've been filling a huge gap on our island and our region in general of just like Micronesian family friendly, but like current events type media, because that's just a huge gap in our representation on our island. We don't really have like YouTube series or videos or even TV shows that feature Chamorros and other Micronesian islanders from our region. And so it's a pretty like ambitious thing for a nonprofit to do, especially film nonprofits. They require a lot of like funding and stuff, but I'm just really happy to be working there because another like project that is under them right now is called Protect Guam Water, and so they're doing a lot of like education work around our water issues in Guam right now. Specifically, like we have this aquifer in the north that supplies 80% of our population with our primary source of water that's being threatened by the military buildup. And so NIHI is also doing a lot of organizing and education around that. And so I've been helping with that as well.
Awesome. Is there could plug something to help if we were able to make donations or anything to your organization?
Yeah. So NIHI, NIHI, I think if you look up NIHI Kids, because they originally started out as like a children's media company, that's their Instagram, and you can find a lot of our information there. Protect Guam Water, I think if you go to our Instagram, you'll find a petition there that we're currently trying to spread the word about Guam's water issue right now. And that would be just a great help to get as many people to sign the petition and help us advocate for our water, because right now that's kind of one of the most urgent issues for us that we've been really struggling to get the military to halt a lot of the development they're doing in the north, because they've destroyed a lot of our ecosystems, and they're currently where they're going to build a firing range is right on top of Guam's most important aquifer. So yeah, so the work we're doing with Protect Guam Water is kind of spreading the news about the urgency of this issue and kind of ways that we can help and advocate for our people and call on different political leaders on our island and in the States to kind of help us with that.
Okay. Be sure to follow, like, and see this lovely lady in all her work. Also, another question that I wanted to ask, I know it says you want to decolonize the classroom. Tell us more about the Chamorro education efforts.
Yeah, so I mean, it's really hard to kind of like when just approaching that in general, right? Decolonizing the classroom. I mean, I feel like it's been a multi-generational effort to kind of enter this space that was originally created to kind of take out all of like the nativeness in us and kind of turn us into a very specific like westernized mold. And so for me, decolonizing the classroom in Guam has been trying to be part of any efforts to make our textbooks and our teachers and our classrooms and our resources be Guam and Micronesia focused. And so last year, or no, wow, 2 years now, since the pandemic, when I was a fellow for NDN, I used a lot of that. I used that year to kind of help launch this charter school that is now in the same place that I went to school like in the southern part of the island, servicing a lot of kids who don't have access to trades education. And that was a really big, important thing for me to be part of, that we would start opening schools that are geared more towards different types of learning. And it was also meant to be is meant to have an emphasis on cultural education as well. And then now that I'm doing and writing lesson plans for the Chamorro and Micronesian Educational Media organization, it's been a lot of just, at the end of the day, like if our classrooms don't reflect the perspectives and the histories and the worldviews of our people, then like what's the point? And we shouldn't be dragging like our kids into these schools that fundamentally don't value them, don't uplift them, don't center their voices. And I think like as long as the school system in general is going to be present, and while it'd be great to dismantle the whole thing and start over, working with what we've got and kind of at least trying to ensure that if they're going to be in this system, then we're going to do everything that we can to make them feel like their lives are valued and their perspectives are valued, then we should do all we can. And so for me, it's been a lot of like being part of textbook projects that are rewriting all these social studies programs so that they're from Chamorro and Micronesian perspectives, making sure that all of our public school teachers have access to like Chamorro and Micronesian media. Yeah, and just being part of different of those efforts. Because for me, education has always fundamentally been about access. Because when you grow up like poor and you realize that, oh dang, like school systems may suck, but also this is a place where a lot of people get their 3 square meals a day, and they get like a clean, comfortable room, and they get like stability away from maybe the instability of their home life. It's where they can have like a break from sometimes the harder things. So for me, if it's meant to be a haven, then I'm going to make sure it's a Chamorro Micronesian haven. But yeah.
That's amazing. So have you had more like people wanting to push for you, or have you had more like pushback from it?
You know, I will say that in the past, I want to say like 5 years, there's been such a really beautiful cultural like renaissance, I want to say, just in so many different efforts on like, whether it's like our public school teachers from the Department of Education, um, this Chamorro Immersive School. I'm thinking of like Harao and the work that they're doing uh, as the first like immersive Chamorro language school that they started within one of the public elementary schools, and how just just ever since I moved back home to be part of this movement, I see so many people on Guam doing everything they can to ensure that our language and our perspectives and our inheritance like of our ancestral lands like don't disappear. And it's been really beautiful to realize that joining in these efforts, I'm not alone at all, and that I'm actually joining a very long history of work, and I have so many uh, elders and peers to look to like lean on and learn from, and like to see that this younger generation that is coming up, they're so much more aware than I feel like I ever was in middle school and high school, and they're so much more eager to talk about these things. And you know, every time I talk to my parents, it's actually really nice to be in multi-generational settings at all times, living on a small island and just being how we are as Indigenous people. When you have access to your aunties and your grandparents or other people's grandparents, and also your nieces and nephews, right, and you're constantly aware of all the conversations that are happening across these generations. For me, it's been so relieving to see and to hear my elders confirm that there has like the change might seem small or incremental to you, but as someone who's 60, 70, 80 plus years, it's impossible not to notice how our island has shifted in this direction towards centering like our rights as Chamorros, our rights as Micronesians. And to me, when you're doing the work and it seems like you can only count your losses, and for every win you have like all of these steps back, it can feel really like demoralizing, and it can feel like, man, why be part of this work at all? But when you hear elders kind of talk about, no, like you're saying like your bit, which has been like maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years at most. But for me, I'm seeing this collective movement of all of you different kids going out there and being part of these efforts. And it amounts to something much bigger than you could ever even dream of doing by yourself. And that's kind of the beauty, right, of our collectivism, of our multi-generational approaches to movement work, that it predates us and it will outlast us. And that the work of our grandparents was not in vain, the work of us is not in vain, because we're seeing it being taken up by our nieces and nephews and our cousins. And to me, that's been probably the most beautiful part of decolonization work. And I have to remember to center myself in that, because, man, being part of the effort can sometimes just be very taxing. And you're like, why didn't I just choose a job where I could get rich? You know, like, why did I choose? I could have chose anything else and I chose this. But when I think of that, when I have conversations with my nieces and they sound so much more aware than I was at like 14, it feels worth it.
And when you're so like traditional, that is like more that is worth more than money to me.
Right.
Because kind of how I feel. Like I also wanted to touch on, you were talking about language and traditions and everything. Over here in the States, we've had the problem with the generations before me going to boarding school and not being able to use their language. And over the years, that generation has not wanted to teach it because they were taught not to use it. And so now we're having a lot of language issues. And now that the elders, that are elders, they're starting to pass on. So it's kind of, we're closing in on hammer time now. So are y'all
Mm-hmm.
to face anything like that?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I've never been so much more aware of that than maybe in the past couple of years. Because for me, I like English was my first language, even though I heard Chamorro, which is my like the Chamorro language is the native language of Guam, and that's my dad's language, and then Palauan, which is my mom's native language. I grew up with, you know, being around both my grandmas, both my parents. My parents were kind of fluent in their language, but by the time, I mean, they're fluent in their language, but by the time they grew up and had us, there was a huge discouragement to teach your kids their language and in the home, because you were told that they were going to have troubles in the classroom. And then, I mean, during the U.S. naval era, uh, this is before we properly became a territory or colony of the U.S. During before and after World War II, the Chamorro language was banned, and you were punished if you spoke it. And so we have a lot of like what you were talking about in boarding schools. A lot of Chamorro elders can relate with that, which is they were punished if they spoke the language, and so teaching it at home was obviously not encouraged. And then for my parents, even though they were fluent enough because they spoke the language at home, they were told that this is not going to be the language of success for your kids, and you're a bad parent if you confuse them or if you don't strengthen their English. And so growing up, even though I heard the language a lot at home, I was primarily raised to value English. And so it wasn't until maybe 5 years ago when I started doing activist work and then joining up with organizations that were offering free Chamorro language classes that I started taking it and taking my language more seriously and language learning more seriously. And so Harao Academy was one of the organizations that I mentioned, but they've been a huge part of the effort towards revitalizing and the language and making sure that those language classes are specifically available, and catching our nannies, catching our babies while they're young, and teaching them, enrolling them in schools that are immersive in our language while they're young. And to think that we have a new generation of Chamorro language speakers that are actually younger than me. I mean, I get so jealous when I watch videos of them or when I visit the schools or when I'm around them and they're speaking fluent Chamorro and they're like 3, 4, 5, and 6. And I'm just like, man, I have to like, I'm fighting for my life with these vocabulary lessons. But it was so humbling though, because uh, ever since I had enrolled in like the free community classes, and then and even Nihi, the organization I work for now, a couple of years ago they had offered community Chamorro classes, and once I had taken them and taken it seriously, it's so beautiful because when you go into these community classrooms and you see the interest, it's people of all ages, people from all economic backgrounds, and kind of the interest and the love for wanting to learn our language. I remember the first weeks of class, that was always the first exercise we did, which everyone went around and talked about why they're taking the class at all. And a lot of us had a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of heaviness there because we were all talking about everything that we feel like we've lost and that we don't have access to. And then a lot of it was just the tenderness of like, I want to be able to have a fluent conversation with my grandma before she passes. And so for me, it's like that sense of urgency is so felt on a personal and on a collective level, where it's like every 5 years we lose like hundreds and almost 1,000 like speakers, right? We don't have very many speakers of Chamorro language left that were fluent ever since they were little. And so every year it's like a really huge effort to make sure that we have a generation that actually knows and speaks our language. But yeah, so there's a lot of efforts to revitalize it. And it feels good to be part of those.
That is awesome. I
Mm-hmm.
I wholeheartedly feel that because my grandfather was a chief of our tribe, and when he
Wow.
was alive, spoke not fluent, but we could speak sentences and understand.
Mm-hmm.
And one of these kids, we do have a new program here in our tribe, and one of the kids came up to me and just started speaking to me, and I was all like, I can understand what he's saying, but can I think of what to say? And he's like, can you still count to 10? And I tried, I could only count to 3. I can't even count to 10 anymore. And I was like, that was so embarrassing. I was like, hold
Yeah.
on. Like, oh, it's like, it is very that to where it's, if you don't use it, you lose it. And I believe that now. Like, I was like, oh no, I could do this. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, that was so embarrassing because this kid was like 12 years old talking to me. And I was like, hold on, get my book. Like, oh, that is so important, and that sounds so great that y'all are doing those efforts, and thank you so much for doing that because I mean it means so much to the world, to your tribe, to your families, and it's great. It's great to see that, and hopefully it inspires some of these people that are watching us today.
Mhm.
Um, let's get off of the specifics and the big topics. Let's just talk about you and see what you like to do for fun while you're there.
Oh my gosh, thanks. Okay. You know what's so funny? I was just about to say, like, in my heart of hearts, like, there's the part of me that's like very social. I love being in my community. I love going out with my friends. And there's the other part of me that's always been like such a huge nerd. I love like reading books. I love like chilling at my home. I'm such a homebody. But yeah, I mean, part of the beauty of living on an island is that like in the most stereotypical way, I love being a beach girl. I love going to the beach on the weekends. I love like laying out in the sun and swimming. Um, but truly, like, I mean, my family is a family of like artists. I have a lot of all of my siblings, like especially my sisters, they're all in the arts, either visual artists or musicians. And so being on Guam, I feel like what we do for fun, it kind of boils down to like eating and like hanging out at other people's houses and being around like music. Like if you could boil down like the very essence of like our get-togethers. I mean, obviously now that like we have fancier restaurants and fancier venues, but it all boils down to like, oh, you want to go and meet up with so and so you could talk story and catch up, maybe shit talk a little with your friends, have a drink. But at its essence, it's like, oh, what kind of food's gonna be there? What are we gonna eat? Who's singing? It's like, oh my gosh, our group chats, it's always like, oh, who do you want to watch sing tonight? Oh, where are we gonna eat? It's like the most important questions. Like, is there gonna be good food? And is there gonna be good singing? So at its heart,
Who's
at
gonna
its
be?
heart, yeah, who's all gonna be there? Yeah. And you know, when you're on a small island and you don't have access to like, big city life, it's like it really matters who all is gonna be there. Because like our communities are small. All of our overlapping dramas interact. So it's like I gotta know who's gonna be there.
Like, oh great, Becky's gonna be there. Like,
Literally, I was telling my friend, I was like, I used to be like such a hater when I was growing up. I was like, all Chamorro and Micronesian aunties want to do is talk shit and gossip. And now that I'm getting older, I'm like, that shit sounds great. I can't wait to be old. like, man, all my grandma ever did, I felt like, was go on the phone and be like, hey, did you hear so and so? And now I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm only like 27 and I can feel myself meeting up with people just to talk shit. But I tell my friends all the time, I was like, it's really important that as people in the movement, we have these small joys, aka the lighthearted gossip that keeps us going. Oh man.
What connects all of our Indigenous communities. It is all the same, no matter what time zone you are in.
Literally. I never met an Indigenous person who didn't have a judgmental auntie. I'm like, oh my gosh. These are things that connects us. It's like, okay, our fight for waters, our fight for our people, and then judgmental grandmas and aunties. It's like, oh, can't wait to be that.
I'm slowly turning into that now because I'm like, I am not the niecey no more. I am now the auntie that knows everything because everybody to me and they're like, but don't. And their favorite saying is, "Don't tell this." And I'm like.
Every time, oh my gosh, literally being the people's confessional box. I was like, what do you mean I'm not supposed to tell? I'm like, I have so many people's conflicting information.
And y'all
are, whoa. Yeah. Oh, I love this.
Connecting all the Indigenous thoughts one auntie at a time.
Yes.
Well, darling, we are almost at the close, so I just have one more question. Is there anything you want to highlight or plug or tell us again how we can help you out in your efforts there in your island?
Yeah, I think the main thing I'll plug right now is protect Guam water. So I think if you were to type that on Instagram, our page will come up, and it's our petition to protect our aquifer. Because right now our water issue is kind of at the top of our education efforts. But yeah, if you want to help out with that, share the petition with your friends, text it to all your community village group chats.
Oh, get it first.
Because you let us, yeah. So yeah, if you want to help be part of that, that would be so great. But other than that, just stay beautiful and stay Indigenous.
Thank you so much. Like, it has been so good talking to you. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. It's an early day. Hopefully it's the best day. Be sure to visit an auntie today.
Yes.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, I am Sage Chanell, your host for Skoden Talks with the Homies with Indigenous Peoples Project, aka IP3. Be sure to like and share, and we will see y'all next time. Thank you so much, darling. We will
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.